My name's Jill Rowe, and in this episode of the Different Podcast, Steve Chalke and I talk about being compassionate. From realising that compassion means to suffer with, we go on to explore how it literally is the action that can save us and transform us, both individually and as a global family. We see that ultimately life isn't about the survival of the fittest, but the survival of the friendliest. From neuroscience to geopolitics, from our health and well-being to the necessity of proximity and cycles of compassion, it becomes clear through our chat that being compassionate is something we most definitely need and something we must definitely be. We pray this conversation helps you. Steve, it's good to see you.
And you, Jill. The feeling is most definitely mutual.
I like the fact that we're both wearing navy blue.
Oh, yeah,
tonight,
yeah, navy blue. And what you got?
I've got black trousers.
Oh, and I've got black trousers too.
Oh, nailed it.
Do you know?
Isn't that
because you're the other side of a table with a cloth on. I can see that.
Yeah, black trousers.
And
trainers.
white hair, of course.
Oh, yeah, white hair.
Yeah.
White trainers?
No, black trainers.
Oh.
Stripy socks?
No.
There you go. Doesn't work, does it? Okay. Anyway,
it's good to see you.
Now, you always know what we're going to be talking about, Jill,
today,
which is a great comfort to somebody like me.
It's nice, isn't it? That I've done that little bit of work.
Yeah. I like life, it comes in two parts, doesn't it? Yeah. The bits you have to be in charge of, which I find is quite a lot in my life, chairing a meeting, chairing another meeting, getting a paper done, all that kind of stuff. And then I can come here and I'm not in charge of anything.
And it's all my fault if it goes wrong. No, I'm joking. Well, that's good. That's great. So we're going to talk about being compassionate today. It's another one of our 9 habits, which we're doing this series on. So I thought it'd be really good to have a chat with you about it. But I do love a Google definition.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about compassion because it's com and passion, isn't it? Yeah. I know that bit. It's two words that go together.
Yeah. I was really surprised at Google because a definition according to Google was pity or concern for another's suffering, which to me seems a bit not quite
weak. Lame.
Yeah, and I just don't think that's...
Yeah, because that's like...
pity, is it?
That's like you look at all the children being slaughtered in Gaza, for instance, and you got a bit of pity for them.
It's not enough, is it?
Well, no. Well, in my opinion, no.
So, and it actually means to suffer with, doesn't it? That's the actual meaning of the word.
Compassion, to suffer alongside, the passionate engagement with the suffering of another, rather than your own passion for yourself.
Yeah, and I remember, I can even remember doing this talk. I was actually doing the talk. It was in the building, the school where I taught, where I first met you. And it was because the church I was going to was having a refurb. And so we were meeting in the school. And I remember doing this talk and I used this quote from Tony Campolo, your dear friend. And it was just something I'd heard him say. And he just said, the passion that stirs is the compassion that saves. And it just made me realise that compassion is like this. Whoa, this is a really big deal. But it's an action-based thing.
What you say, having not thought about any of this until you started saying it.
Moment.
But what you say, it reminds me actually of a quote I used to know off by heart, and I will misquote now. So anybody who's listening and says that's not quite it, I know. But General Booth, William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, he was very elderly, and it was the last time he spoke publicly. He spoke in the Royal Albert Hall, and they'd all gathered to listen to him. And he simply said this. He said, whilst women weep, whilst children on the streets don't have clothing, whilst men go in and out of prison and no one cares, and he builds this whole picture, this is happening and that is happening and this is happening and that's happening. And then this old man stands there, he says, I will fight.
Yeah.
That's compassion as far as I'm concerned. So when we look at children on the TV in Gaza or Ukraine or on the streets of our cities and, in the social housing, or when we learn about the need of any child or any elderly person who's abandoned on their own and doesn't have anyone knock on their door all day long, then it ignites this thing in you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you think, this is our responsibility. It's not that I can commentate on it and I know about it. It's, did I knock on the door of the person that lives next to me?
Yeah.
Am I engaged in the school down the road for me? Do I stop and talk to the mum at the gates? All that kind of, do I bother to learn about their world and meet their need? Which can seem overwhelming. But what I find, perhaps I'm taking this all in the wrong direction, is that when you empty yourself into that, and it is hard, I find it's hard, but there's a strength in it, and there's a kind of regeneration in it.
Yeah.
It gives life to you as you invest in others, which is a strange thing to say. Does that make any sense, or is it just mad?
Absolutely. And I think all the science would say that that's exactly what's happening, which is really interesting, right? That our physiology responds really positively to the notion of compassion. I always say that compassion has proximity. Like, you can't be compassionate at a distance. Like, it requires, there's something about being compassionate which is about, it propels you into the orbit of another person, right?
Yes. And so, to go back to the Ukraine and children or children in other parts of the world who are living in famine, et cetera, they've been bombed out their houses, wherever it might be. And sadly, it's in too many places. There's not a proximity to that. And yet you can create a proximity, can't you? When the Ukrainian war broke out, I tell you what I did. I went to, I think, what's it called? Hobby shop. I can't.
Hobbycraft.
Hobbycraft.
Little plug for Hobbycraft.
Oh, yeah. Do you know, Jill, I am a member of Hobbycraft. There's a little known fact about me. I've got a membership card.
Are you a member of Costco as well? Because that's quite something.
No, just Hobbycraft. You see, I haven't been to Hobbycraft for a long time, but I went down when, we first saw those pictures of the Ukrainian war and the children on the streets bombed out of their houses with nothing. So I went to Hobbycraft. I didn't even know Hobbycraft had existed. I confess my total ignorance of these things.
You being an arts and crafts person.
Yeah. And so I asked my wife, I asked Cornelia, where can I get some blue and yellow ribbon? You see? And she said, Hobbycraft in Croydon. And I drove all the way to Croydon to buy all the blue and yellow ribbon, the reels of it, that I possibly could, but they didn't have enough. And I said, where's your next shop? And it was, I can't remember it was Kingston or somewhere. And then I drove all the way to Kingston and I bought loads more.
It's like an alternative to a pub crawl, isn't it? It's a Hobbycraft crawl.
And I brought it back to Waterloo and the next day. And at the church here, I just said to everyone, we're going to make yellow and blue ribbons. And I got little pins to stick in. And then we're going to sell them. We're going to give them out. You can buy them. I think actually we made loads, and most of the people there bought them, and then other people bought them. And then we did it in some of the schools, as you know. And it was great for the kids in our schools because it gave them the opportunity to be compassionate rather than just have pity. To your point. Yeah. And they did this amazing thing, and they raised enough money to buy a 4x4 vehicle to deliver medical supplies in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. And in actual fact, that vehicle still works. I stay in touch with the gang that we gave the vehicle to, and it delivers so much food and so much medical aid, and it's been brilliant. As I've watched the faces of some of the kids that got involved, or the people in the church here now, and I've shown them a little film. I've got the car and the guys in it and all the rest of it. And you watch people, cry because they know that they did something.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a compassionate act.
Yeah, and there's this idea, isn't there, that compassion, when we show compassion, what's actually happening in our brain, in our bodies, is the hormones needed for nurture and everything are being released. And it's so obvious. It seems like the most strikingly obvious thing to say. But compassion is about releasing the instinct we have for nurture. So it actually helps the human race, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like it is the tool for our continuation. It's the way that we grow and flourish. To not show compassion is actually evolutionary bad, because it wrecks us.
Yeah. Well, to show compassion, I know, just as I would know it from my own life, let alone the way of working with many of the young people that we work with in sometimes very difficult situations. It reduces your stress levels.
Yeah.
Compassion reduces your stress levels. It reduces your cortisol levels. It's good for your heart. It reduces your blood pressure. It does all these things. You're going to live longer if you live for others.
Which is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like it's the most obvious. Yeah. It's like it's the medicine.
Yeah. In fact, we probably talked about this before, but, Darwin's great theory, survival of the fittest, and all the really scholarly work that's been done now. In fact, people even say we've misread Darwin himself, and he wasn't talking about survival of the fittest in the way that we've understood it, brute force, because it's the survival of the friendliest. It's the survival of the most collaborative. And all the research shows that's the only reason that human beings, Homo sapiens, survived. We clearly weren't, faster or more powerful than saber-toothed tigers. We would have been polished off if it was about the survival of the strongest. It was the survival of the most collaborative, the people that could work together to build community, to build tribe, to build village, to stand beside one another. And, in that book that I wrote recently, The Manifesto for Hope, I tell a story about a mum that I met in Croydon. And she was in a terrible, terrible state. And she said to me, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough. And she told me the story of how she's a single mum. She gets her kids out of bed every morning. She drops them off at 2 at a primary school, 1 at one of our schools. She has to, of course, get them out of bed, give them breakfast, get them showered, get them washed, get them in the car, deliver them. Then she said, I go home and I drop the car. Then I get myself washed and showered and ready for work. Then I get on a train up to London. All day London I work. And then at the end of the day, I get back on the train and I race back to the places I leave my children. I pay so that they can have support and care because I can't get back on time. I pick them up from where they are. I get them home. Then I sit them down. Then I put a meal on for them and I prepare the meal. Then I work with them through their homework and I have to run down the shops to get another stick of Brit stick or whatever it is because I haven't got anything. And then I get them ready for bed and then I sit with them and then I read to them and finally they go to sleep. And then I come downstairs and then I have to do all the emails for the next day for my job. And then I go to bed and she said, the next thing I know, I wake up and it all starts again like Groundhog Day. Yeah. And she said, that's every day and I'm not enough. I'm not enough. And the point is, of course, that we were never supposed to be enough because compassion was built into village life, into tribal life, into community life. Yeah. And it's what our brains are made for. It's what our bodies are made for.
Yeah.
And we can't do without it. But we try to do without it.
Survival of the friendliest, which is really interesting when you think about current affairs, isn't it? Like these things are going nowhere. Conflict, whatever it is, whether you, and even in a workplace, you just think, oh my word, it's the friendly route, the compassionate route is the route. It is the gateway to our thriving.
Have I told you about allo parenting?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 But remind us.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I've talked about it or not because, you're always prepared and I haven't a clue what I'm talking about. So this, I would have talked to you about it. But in fact, I was talking to some people just yesterday about it. And I said this thing, I always say now, I'm grown it into this little thing that I do. I say parenting for turtles.
Yeah.
Parenting for turtles. Do you know what parenting for turtles is? What you do, it's just down to the female, the male.
Of course it is, Steve.
Not in the least bit interested in parenting at all, full stop. But the female turtle has to parent all by herself. And this parenting involves crawling out the sea, if it's a sea turtle like a leatherback, crawling up a sandy beach one night in the full moon, digging a very shallow hole in the sand, laying a few eggs, then hastily covering them over with a bit of sand, not to cover them over with the sand. And then waddling back, back into the sea and swimming off. And that is parenting turtle style. And, there's a funny way of saying it. It's all over. It's all over.
Job done.
From then on, job done. That egg is all on its own. Will it get squashed? Will it get trodden on? Will it get pecked by a bird of prey? Will a seagull get it? Will some kid pick it up and take it home and put it on a shelf? Who knows what's going to happen? Or will it survive? And then if it survives, turtle eggs hatch at full moon because the moon reflects on the water and they know which way the water is. But now we've built all these roads by beaches with the lights and the restaurants and the bars, and these little turtles hatch and they see the lights and they crawl the wrong way and then they get squished by cars and things. Will these turtles survive, and how many of them will survive at all? Parenting for turtles is very short, and actually this applies to most fish, most amphibians, reptiles, etc., etc. But human beings, we're different. We do this for life, and this is where this phrase allo parenting comes in. Because it's become so known that this happens to turtles, you can even now, Jill, go on a holiday. You can go to India, where Chennai, where Oasis works. You can go all over the world to beaches, and you can spend your whole holiday picking little turtles up as they hatch and carrying them to the sea. That's called allo parenting, other parenting. And the great thing about human beings, which sets us apart, we do that for turtles, is that compassion, because we other parent one another. That's what compassion for me is really about.
Yeah, it has proximity. It pulls us towards one another, and it pulls us out of ourselves, doesn't it? It helps us to see beyond our ego, beyond our needs, which might be quite selfish at times. And
for me, so one of the verses or the little passages, it's a song that's in the New Testament. In the second half of the Bible, Paul the Apostle, who wrote quite great chunks of the letters that make this up, he quotes, it's not his words, he quotes this song that they used to sing. We've not got the tune anymore, but you can tell it's a song because the way it scans. And it just simply says, it begins, it's about Jesus. And it says that, he didn't hang on to the power that he had, but instead he emptied himself. It is the word emptied himself, and he became a servant of all. And because of this, God lifted him high. And since I was a kid, that it challenges me hugely, because I tend to get wrapped up in myself and rather than wrapped up in others.
Yeah.
But I know from my life experience, the more I give myself to others, which I find as difficult as the next person, incredibly, the more you always get. It's an extraordinary thing.
And don't you think as well, Steve, that when you participate in enacting what compassion actually is, i.e. it's more than pity, you discover a commonality with other people, don't you? You're like, oh, yeah, me too. It's this gateway on inclusion as well, isn't it? Because it's never a transaction. Compassion is not, well, if I do this, then I get that. That's not what compassion is. Compassion is, I'm going to do this. Oh, and crikey, look, we're becoming closer. We're becoming friends. We're discovering that we belong to each other. So it's not a transaction, Steve, is it? It's you give. And then I remember, so there's this video, you and I have watched this little video because we were in a meeting together where I showed it. And I think it's called Step Inside the Circle of Compassion. And it was of a prison in the States, and all the prisoners. There's this incredible woman who stands in the middle of this circle of offenders. And it's a huge circle, and there's all of these offenders. And she just starts to invite them. They're not friends with one another. There's animosity, there's gangs, but she starts to ask them questions about their life experiences. And she just says to them, step inside the circle. So she asks each question. And you can see on their faces that they're realizing, oh, I hadn't clocked that person who I thought was my enemy has got the same story in part as me. And I didn't realize that all of those people have gone through a similar experience to me. And you can just see that what's happening is they're really far out. And as they start to understand and share their story together, they actually come closer together. And in the video, they talk about it and say, some of them say, this has possibly been the best day of my life, because they suddenly realize they're not alone.
It's an incredible thing. As you speak, I had this great experience last week, actually. I was in Bradford.
Oh, yeah.
And a decade ago, we began a school there. I shouldn't say we began it. It was a school that needed new leadership, and it became part of Oasis. And this part of Bradford, it's a wonderful place. It's called Manningham. Manningham has many kinds of poverty in it. And it's predominantly a community, a Muslim community. And so this decade ago, I went and met the leaders of the mosque and the community there and got involved with them. It's fantastic people. All my upbringing would have told me that you shouldn't do that, you see. Yeah. It was a strange thing. But, of course, I think very differently about it. Anyway, so last week, we were celebrating a decade of this school, and the school, which was in a bad situation, is now solidly good all round. It's a great school. It's a good school. It's got a fantastic team, I have to tell you, and wonderful. But anyway, we had this celebration for the 10th anniversary, and the leaders of the mosque came and they gave me, this shawl, this huge shawl. And they said that in their villages, you gave a shawl to somebody who you had committed to you. And this shawl, they said, represented for me. They hung it round me, and they said, "This is our protection round you." Oh,
amazing.
It's a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
I brought it home. Cornelia really loves it.
I saw a picture of it. It's very beautiful.
I don't think I'll get a chance to wear it very much. I think it's been stolen. But it was so kind of them to say, and for them and for me, of course, this relationship across this decade has been, as you say, thoroughly enriching.
Yeah.
Thoroughly enriching.
Yeah.
All of us in our brokenness and our need for community, finding strength through our love for, our compassion, our standing alongside the needs of others in an active way in that community.
So all those moments in the Jesus story where he is with the outsider but also the insider, isn't he? It's often the case that they're there at the same time. It's like he's saying to the insiders, "Hey, look, see your brother, see your sister, see this as if it's your child. See every story is run through with that. Have proximity. This is how we thrive, because it's not us and them. It's just we're together."
Yeah, and since we're talking about Jesus, which I always like doing actually, because I've just found him so inspiring over the years. So the incredible thing is, there's so many people in society who believe that God's down on them, Jesus is down on them, Christianity is down on them. But actually, to your point, if you read the stories about Jesus, you'll find his embrace for everyone, his compassion for everyone. Everyone was absolutely enormous. There's no judgment in any of it. His frustration and his anger was safe for just one group of people, and it was the religious leaders. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. It was always the religious leaders who barred some people,
who create the outsider.
who created the outsider. But he spent his whole time with the outsiders, with anybody actually.
Yeah.
And in that kind of compassionate embrace that creates energy and strength for everyone. But he constantly pointed out to those who would bar someone from being in for whatever reason, he said, you stand under condemnation. And the condemnation, of course, he's talking about is what they do to themselves. Their sin, if you want to give it that terminology, is its own punishment.
Yeah.
They've denuded themselves through their own activity of the life that could be theirs.
Yeah. Just that a bit of a quote from Gregory Boyle where he just says, no daylight to separate us. Isn't it? Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Jill.